And thanks for just saying that little snippet about that little girl. Like literally, that makes my heart break. Like all these things that you don't ever think of, and as a disabled person, you have so much to learn about other individuals, and I wouldn't necessarily know that about Tait. So that is insightful, and I think that fostering of an inclusive culture, very much what Richard said. For me, it comes from an awareness of difference, because difference isn't a bad thing. And we shy away from labels, and really they're just to be embraced completely. And I think as senior leaders can understand that difference is only going to enhance a business, then that would be just a much better first step than what I potentially have experienced as somebody in business. So I'll give you a little bit of background. I have struggled in my sort of almost 20 years of being in the workforce. I have struggled to progress and develop. A lot of my development has come from being had been self-served in a way. So I, as a disabled person, am inherently ambitious, hardworking, and all of those types of characteristics that you do often find with disabled people. And I don't want to be stereotypical, but a lot of that does come from the barriers that are put in our way to integrate into the workforce properly. So I have always grown up with a very successful father in insurance, actually, who has been the CEO of many insurance organisations. He currently works for Hiscox as Chief Underwriting Officer. So my dad has always been that person where I'm like, oh, that's some like hefty shoes to follow. And he never really implemented the tools for me to do that, because at the time when I was born, sort of early 80s, there wasn't really that resource behind how do we help a disabled person. And when I was young, the narrative was very much just do what you can and work harder than anybody else. And hopefully you'll level that playing field for yourself. So it was all about me adapting to my surroundings as a minority rather than the other way around. So when I entered the workforce, there was no inclusive culture really in my industry. So I work in marketing. Marketing as an industry is a bit unforgiving, you know, it's relentless. I love marketing. Marketing was that first touch point in my life where I thought, oh, I can do this, because I learned something at school that was very loosely linked to marketing, and I grabbed hold of it because it was the first aspect or the first situation where I felt I could do something. And so I thought to myself, well, I'm going to run with this because I'm good at it. And that's what I did. I went to university and I went into a career. But the tenacity, I should say, and the pace and the intensity of marketing doesn't actually leave room for a lot of inclusion. And brands at the moment are understanding that we do need to be more inclusive, but that inclusive lens is still very much an external output rather than the internal effort. So when I got to around 27, I was still at quite a low level in my career, given that I had already been out of university for 7 years. There wasn't really that much progression. I was held back a lot. I would put on performance plans for no reason. I couldn't keep up with some of my peers, or I couldn't attend certain meetings because they were off-site with no parking. There was no provisions made for the fact that I needed closed captions or anything like that. So I was constantly battling. And as a disabled person who is extremely ambitious, because I feel like I've got something to prove, I watched the 2012 Olympics and on the TV, and it was my first experience of representation. And as somebody who was just working, going home, partying at the weekends, that was all my life was. And then I saw it on the TV and I saw it on the billboards and I saw these disabled athletes doing amazing things. And yes, there was a bit of narrative around disability, but for the first time in my life, as much as it might have been glamorized, it was my first positive representation of disability. And it was enough to say to me, as a person who didn't think they could do anything in sport, it was enough for me to go to London, to become a spectator and to watch it. And when I came back from the closing ceremony, I decided I'm going to be in Rio. I'm going to get there. I'm going to become a wheelchair racer. Never in my life had I even sat in a wheelchair in a sport capacity. For me, it was a very sort of medical tool. And I put my life on hold and I put my career on hold for 5 years. I still had to work in marketing because brand didn't support para athletes at that time. So I didn't have the means to stop working. So I had to do both alongside each other. Then in just the year before Rio, I managed to secure paid sponsorship, which allowed me to become a professional athlete and go straight into full-time racing. Then I went back into the workplace. And the differences between having an almost protected, elevated status as a disabled person, being an acceptable disabled person, and going back into the workforce and struggling with the same issues really impacted me. That was compounded by the fact that I got pregnant. And when I got pregnant, people assumed that it was okay to ask me really invasive questions about how I even got pregnant or how I was going to have the baby. And this was in a workplace setting. This is not uncommon for me. I have been asked in a workplace setting if I have intimate relations and things like this. So it's really your bodily autonomy goes out the window as a disabled person. And when I went on maternity leave, I actually went into a bit of a, I'm going to say I was very depressed. I was very isolated, and I really struggled because I felt that people were judging me as a disabled mum. So when I returned back into the workforce, you can see some patterns here. I keep dipping in and out of the workforce. So when I went back to my marketing role, I decided enough is enough. I cannot live in the medical world of disability anymore, because I had enough about me and enough understanding of my circumstances that I understood that disability is a social construct. And so I decided to make a change and I went into EDI. So I was still working in marketing, but I set up a colleague network, and it went from one person, which was me, to 500 colleagues in the space of a year at a very well-known corporate organisation. That spearheaded my career. That's where the development came, because all of a sudden people made provisions and I was able to be myself, and I was able to say, this isn't right. These systemic attitudes to, you know, is it hard to employ a disabled person? They are true attitudes that people do have, but I just faced into it. Currently, I am still working in marketing. I still love it. But recently, I have been carving out an EDI career path. So hopefully, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you might see some changes in the very near future, which is going to be very much EDI led. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I think really the lived experience of my intersectionality, not just as a disabled person, but as a woman, as a caregiver, you know, having a child, that intersectionality has really made me an advocate for other people, and that's where the impact is. So yeah, I'm really happy to attend this panel, so thanks for having me.